Is this some kind of joke? The voice, sharp with the arrogance of a fresh MIT degree, cut through the humid, metallic air of the engine room. Bryce, the lead civilian engineer, clipboard in hand, stared at the old man who had just been escorted down the ladder. We have a catastrophic harmonic resonance in the primary turbine shaft. A problem 3 separate diagnostic teams and a proprietary AI have failed to isolate. And they send me this. Harold Cross, 82 years old, simply stood there. He wore dark blue overalls, clean but softened and faded from decades of faithful service. They hung loosely on his thin frame. His hands, though wrinkled and mapped with the veins of a long life, were steady. He offered no reaction, his calm gray eyes taking in the scene, the anxious faces of the uniformed sailors, the chaotic array of disconnected diagnostic tablets and coiled fiber optic cables, and the heart of the ship itself, the silent monolithic gas turbine engine. It was the newest, most advanced power plant in the Navy's surface fleet, and it was as dead as a stone. The young engineer Bryce scoffed and turned to the nervous-looking junior officer who had brought Harold aboard the USS Reliance. "Lieutenant, I appreciate the Admiral's concern, but we are past the point of folksy wisdom. We need computational analysts, not a museum piece." He gestured dismissively at Harold. "License and registration and get off the bike now, sir," another engineer quipped under his breath, mocking the absurdity of the situation. The small knot of civilian contractors chuckled. Harold's gaze remained placid, unfazed by the insult. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the air thick with the smell of ozone and cooled steel. He was an island of stillness in a sea of frantic energy. The massive engine room, usually a deafening symphony of controlled power, was filled with a tense, unnatural silence, broken only by the irritating hum of emergency lighting and the drip of condensation from an overhead pipe. Bryce took a step closer, invading Harold's personal space. He was a good foot taller, radiating the boundless confidence of a man who believed every problem could be rendered into an algorithm. "Look, Grandpa," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a multi-billion-dollar warship. The integrated power system is more complex than the entire Apollo program. We have terabytes of performance data we're trying to parse. What exactly do you think you're going to do?" For the first time, Harold moved. Slowly, deliberately, he knelt and unlatched a small, plain steel toolbox. It was old, dented, and bore the scars of countless jobs in less than ideal conditions. The engineers exchanged amused glances. From it, Harold retrieved a single tool. It was a wrench, about 10 inches long, but it shone with the soft, unmistakable luster of gold. A wave of disbelief, followed by open laughter, rippled through the civilian team. "Oh, this is rich," Bryce laughed, shaking his head. "A golden wrench. Are you going to magically tap the engine back to life? Is that the big plan?" He turned to the assembled sailors. "This is what happens when you let sentimental brass override procedure. We have protocols. We have diagnostic trees that account for every possible variable. We have run spectral analysis, thermal imaging, lubrication viscosity tests, and a full electronic system sweep. The power output drops to 0 after exactly 74 seconds of operation, with no corresponding error codes from any of the 1,000 sensors in the system. It's a ghost in the machine." Harold rose slowly, the gold wrench held loosely in his hand. His eyes met Bryce's. "Machines don't have ghosts," he said, his voice quiet but resonant, carrying easily through the cavernous space. "They just have secrets." The simplicity of the statement, delivered with such calm authority, momentarily silenced the engineer. But Bryce's ego quickly reasserted itself. "Secrets we can't find with $1 million worth of diagnostic equipment, but you're going to find with a shiny trinket. I have a team of the best minds from General Dynamics and GE Marine standing by. We are working the problem. You are a distraction." Harold's gaze drifted from the engineer to the massive turbine. He could feel it, the subtle tension in the ship's deck plates, the deep, unnatural quiet that spoke of a caged giant. He had known engines like this his entire life. He had helped design their ancestors, the power plants for the nuclear submarines that prowled the silent deep during the Cold War. He knew that for all their layers of modern complexity, at their core they were still machines of fire and steel, of pressure and rotation. They had a rhythm, a voice, and this one was screaming in silence. 74 seconds, Harold mused, more to himself than to anyone else. He took a step toward the turbine housing, his worn boots making no sound on the diamond plate decking. He ignored the engineers, the officers, the entire spectacle of disbelief focused on him. He was alone with the machine now. "That's what I said," Bryce snapped, his patience gone. "Did you not hear me? We've monitored the fuel flow, the exhaust temperature, the rotational velocity. I need you to start the engine." Harold said, his back now to the engineer. The request was so audacious, so contrary to every safety protocol, that it stunned the room into absolute silence. Running a damaged, unpredictable multi-million-dollar engine was unthinkable. Absolutely not, Bryce declared, his face flushing with anger. Are you insane? The harmonic resonance could tear the shaft from its moorings. It could rupture the housing. We would be risking the entire propulsion system. You're not going to solve the problem by looking at data on a screen, Harold replied calmly, his eyes tracing the lines of the engine casing. The secret isn't in the numbers, it's in the sound. As Bryce bristled, ready to order the old man physically removed, Harold's mind drifted for just a second. The gleaming gold wrench in his hand felt warm, familiar. He wasn't seeing the sterile gray engine room of the USS Reliance anymore. For a fleeting moment he was 25 years old again, submerged 1,000 feet beneath the icy waters of the Barents Sea. He was a young machinist's mate on the USS Seawolf, a nuclear submarine on a covert mission at the height of the Cold War. The air was thick with the smell of recycled air and fear. An alarm was blaring, a high, panicked shriek. The sub's main coolant pump had seized, and the reactor was threatening to scram. The boat's commander, a legend named Captain Davenport, had stood beside him in the cramped, sweltering engineering space. Davenport had handed him a wrench, identical to the one he now held. "The schematics are wrong, son," the captain had said, his voice a gravelly whisper over the din. "Forget the book. Listen to the machine. Tell me what it needs." That wrench wasn't gold. It was brass, polished to a high shine from constant use, a tool passed down from the chief who had mentored Davenport himself. It was a symbol, a reminder that some problems required not just knowledge, but a deeper, more intuitive understanding, an intimacy with the machine. "Hey, are you listening to me?" Bryce's sharp voice snapped Harold back to the present. The young engineer's face was a mask of fury. "I am the lead engineer on this project. I am giving you a direct order to step away from the turbine. Lieutenant, escort this man out of my engine room. Now." But the junior officer, a young ensign named Miller, hesitated. He had seen the look in the old man's eyes. It was a look of profound, unshakable confidence. And there was something else. A flicker of recognition. He'd spent a night shift last month digitizing old service records for the archives. The name Harold Cross felt familiar. He remembered a heavily redacted file, full of commendations signed by admirals who were now historical figures. While Bryce fumed, another figure in the room made a move. Chief Petty Officer Davis, a man whose face was a roadmap of 25 years of sea duty, had been watching the entire exchange from a discreet distance. He had seen enough arrogant civilian contractors in his career to recognize a train wreck in the making. He also knew that admirals didn't dispatch mysterious old men to their most advanced warships on a whim. With a subtle nod to Ensign Miller, Davis slipped behind a bank of control consoles, pulled out his phone, and keyed in a number. The call went directly to a secure line, 200 miles away in a quiet wood-paneled office at the Pentagon. Admiral Frank Sterling picked up the phone. "Sterling, Admiral, it's Chief Davis on the Reliance," the CPO said, his voice low and urgent. "Sir, your man is here, Mr. Cross." "I know, Chief. Is he on site?" "He is, Admiral, but there's a problem. The lead civilian engineer, Bryce, well, sir, he's treating Mr. Cross with extreme disrespect. He's calling him Grandpa, mocking his tools, and has just ordered him to be removed from the engine room. He's refusing to cooperate." There was a moment of dead silence on the line. When Admiral Sterling spoke again, his voice was dangerously cold. "Put the lieutenant on the phone, Chief, the one who escorted Mr. Cross aboard." Davis quickly and discreetly passed the phone to Ensign Miller, who paled when he heard the Admiral's voice. "Sir, Ensign, what is your assessment of the situation?" Miller swallowed hard. "Sir, the civilian team is hostile. They're convinced Mr. Cross is a waste of time. Engineer Bryce is about to have him thrown out. But, sir, there's something about Mr. Cross. He's calm. He knows what he's doing. I can feel it." "I see," Sterling said. "Ensign, your orders are as follows. You are to prevent by any means necessary Mr. Cross from being removed from that engine room. You are to place the lead engineer, Bryce, under your direct authority. Cite Naval Vessel Operational Security Protocol. He is a civilian contractor on a commissioned warship, and he is now interfering with a priority directive from my office. Is that understood?" "Sir." "Yes, sir," Miller stammered, his mind reeling. "And Ensign," the Admiral added, his voice like cracking ice, "tell that arrogant child that if he lays a hand on Harold Cross or impedes his work in any way, I will personally fly out there and have him airlifted to a leaky raft in the middle of the Atlantic. Do you copy?" "Crystal clear, Admiral," Miller said, a new steel in his own voice. As the ensign hung up, Admiral Sterling swiveled in his high-backed leather chair and faced the large monitor on his wall. "Computer, pull up the service record for Cross, Harold G., Chief Warrant Officer 5, retired." The screen flickered to life. Most of the file was covered in thick black red action bars, but the parts that were visible were astonishing. Project Chimera, lead propulsion designer. Operation Silent Serpent, reactor incident averted. Commendation for extraordinary ingenuity. Sterling leaned back. Harold Cross wasn't just a genius, he was a legend, a ghost, a man whose entire career was a masterclass in solving the unsolvable. He had personally overseen the design of the Ancestor to the very engine that was now baffling the Navy's brightest minds. Back in the engine room of the USS Reliance, the standoff was reaching its climax. "Lieutenant, did you hear my order?" Bryce demanded, his voice rising to a shout. "Remove this man." Ensign Miller stepped forward, phone in hand, his entire demeanor changed. He was no longer a nervous junior officer. He was an instrument of the Admiral's will. "Mr. Bryce," Miller said, his voice cold and official. "By the authority of Admiral Frank Sterling, Commander, Naval Surface Forces, your lead status on this diagnostic is hereby suspended. You are now acting in an advisory capacity under my command. You will offer Mr. Cross any and all assistance he requires without question or delay. If you interfere, you will be confined to quarters pending review of your contract. This is a matter of operational security." Bryce stared, dumbfounded. The color drained from his face. "You can't be serious." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you are actively obstructing a direct order from the Fleet Command," Miller stated flatly. He then turned to the assembled sailors. "Clear a 10-foot perimeter around the turbine. No one is to speak to Mr. Cross unless he speaks to you first." The sailors, sensing the dramatic shift in power, moved with crisp efficiency. Bryce stood frozen, his jaw working silently, his face a storm of fury and humiliation. He had just gone from being the unquestioned authority to a supervised spectator. It was the ultimate insult, a public emasculation in front of his team and the ship's crew. He locked eyes with Harold, who had watched the exchange with the same detached calm. In that moment, Bryce's professional arrogance curdled into genuine hatred. He was going to prove this old fraud was a charlatan if it was the last thing he did. "Fine," Bryce spat, his voice tight with venom. "You want to run the engine? Be my guest. I hope you have good insurance. I'll be in the control room, monitoring the telemetry. When this antique's little experiment causes a multi-million-dollar explosion, I want the data recorder to show exactly who was responsible." He turned and stormed toward the blast-proof glass of the engineering control room, his team trailing awkwardly behind him. Harold paid him no mind. He turned to a nearby petty officer. "Son, I need you to power up the engine. Run it at idle for exactly 60 seconds. Then advance the throttle to full for exactly 10 seconds. Then shut it down immediately. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, sir," the sailor said, hurrying to a console. As the initial startup sequence began with a low whine, Harold knelt. He pulled a small, worn brass rod from his overalls, not much thicker than a pencil. He placed one end of the rod against the massive turbine housing, and the other end carefully to the bone behind his ear. Inside the control room, Bryce watched the monitors, a smirk on his face. "This is a joke," he muttered to one of his colleagues. "He thinks he's a doctor with a stethoscope. What's next, leeches?" Harold closed his eyes, shutting out the world. The vibrations from the engine traveled up the brass rod, directly into his skull. He wasn't just hearing the machine, he was feeling its heartbeat, its every tremor and subtle complaint. The low hum of the idle state was smooth, perfect. The machine was balanced. It was healthy. The problem wasn't a flaw in its construction. 60 seconds, the petty officer called out, advancing to full throttle. Everything looked perfect. To Bryce, the data was flawless, all green, all within normal parameters. But Harold heard something else. Through the rod, beneath the overwhelming roar of the engine, he heard a sound. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a high-frequency rhythmic ticking. It wasn't a clang or a grind. It was too clean for that. It was more like a whisper, a tiny insistent echo that appeared only under the immense strain of full power. 10 seconds, shutting down. The roar of the engine died, replaced by the whine of the turbine spooling down. In the sudden silence, the engine room felt cavernous and empty again. Harold opened his eyes. He stood up slowly, a look of understanding on his face. He knew the secret. Just at that moment, a klaxon horn blared through the ship. The intercom crackled to life. "Attention on deck. Admiral arriving." The engine room doors swung open. Admiral Frank Sterling himself strode in, flanked by the ship's captain and the commander of the fleet's engineering corps. He was a tall, imposing man in his crisp dress whites, his chest a billboard of distinguished service ribbons. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing the stunned engineers in the control booth, ignoring the ship's officers, and landing directly on the old man in the faded blue overalls. The Admiral marched directly up to Harold Cross. He stopped 3 feet away, his back ramrod straight. In the dead-silent engine room, he raised his hand in a sharp, perfect salute. "Mr. Cross," Admiral Sterling's voice boomed, full of a respect that bordered on reverence. "It is an honor to have you aboard." Harold, holding his gold wrench, simply gave a small, humble nod. "Admiral." A wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. Bryce, watching from behind the glass, felt a cold dread crystallize in his stomach. Admirals do not salute civilian contractors. They certainly do not salute old mechanics in dirty overalls. Sterling dropped his salute but kept his eyes fixed on Harold. Then he turned to address the assembled crew and the shell-shocked engineers. "Some of you seem to be unaware of who this man is," the Admiral began, his voice hard as iron. "Let me enlighten you. This is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Harold Cross, retired. This man forgot more about turbine engines before most of you were born than you will ever learn. In 1983, he saved the USS Hyman G. Rickover from certain destruction in the North Atlantic by rebuilding a thrust bearing out of coffee cans in pure genius. He designed the acoustic baffling system that made our entire fleet of attack submarines the quietest in the world. The very engine you stand before, this marvel of modern technology, is based on a prototype core that Mr. Cross designed on a notepad in a mess hall 2 decades ago." The Admiral took a step toward the control room, his eyes locking onto Bryce with a glare that could melt steel. "You, Mr. Bryce," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You, with your degrees and your algorithms, stand on the shoulders of giants like this man. You are here because of his work. Your disrespect is not just an insult to him, it is an insult to the entire United States Navy and a testament to your own profound ignorance. You mistake knowledge for wisdom. You can read the data, but you cannot hear the music." He turned back to the silent engine room. "This man is a living legend. He is a national treasure. And you, in your arrogance, treated him like a janitor." The rebuke hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Bryce looked like he had been physically struck. The blood had drained from his face, leaving it a pasty white. He was ruined, and he knew it. Admiral Sterling's expression softened as he turned back to Harold. "What did you find, Harry?" Harold held up the gold wrench. "It's the wrench, Frank. The design of the turbine blades is too perfect. Your engineers did their job too well." He stepped toward the engine. At full throttle under maximum torque, the blades are so efficient they create a microscopic vacuum pocket near the tip. So the main computer, in its infinite wisdom, does the only thing it knows how to do when faced with unresolvable, anomalous data. It triggers a fail-safe shutdown of the entire system to prevent damage. It happens at exactly 74 seconds because that's the precise moment the cumulative resonance from those tiny ticks reaches the computer's shutdown threshold. The sheer elegant simplicity of the diagnosis was breathtaking. It was a problem that could never be found by looking at schematics or data logs. It could only be found by someone who understood the soul of the machine. Harold looked at his gold wrench, a fond, distant look in his eyes. A final brief memory flashed. Captain Davenport on the Seawolf, years after that first crisis, handing him the wrench. Only this time, it was different. It had been professionally plated in gold by the ship's jeweler. "A reminder, Harry," the captain had said. "True value isn't on the surface. People will see the gold and be impressed or mock it. But you and I will always know it's just good solid brass underneath. It's what's inside that counts." With the Admiral's permission, Harold approached a small maintenance panel on the turbine housing. He used his gold wrench, fitting it perfectly onto a recessed bolt that wasn't on any of the modern schematics. It was an old manual override from his original design, a feature the new engineers had deemed obsolete and ignored. With a firm, steady turn, he made a minute adjustment to the fuel-to-air mixture regulator, a purely mechanical change of less than half a degree. "There," he said quietly. "That should change the resonant frequency. Start it up." The petty officer, with a glance at the Admiral for confirmation, initiated the sequence. The engine roared to life. It passed the 74-second mark without a hitch. It ran for 2 minutes, then 5, then 10, humming with a powerful, perfectly stable rhythm. The problem was gone. The fallout was immediate. Bryce and his entire team were dismissed from their contracts. The Navy mandated a new training program for all its civilian engineering partners, officially named the Cross Protocol, which focused on the importance of institutional knowledge and respecting veteran experience. Admiral Sterling issued a formal fleet-wide letter of apology to Harold Cross, which was read aloud at every naval base in the world. Months later, Bryce was attending one of these mandatory seminars. The instructor was detailing the legendary career of CW05 Harold Cross, showing a slide with a photo of the old man in his prime. Later that week, sitting in a small cafe near the naval yard, Bryce saw him. Harold was sitting alone by the window, sipping a cup of coffee, looking out at the passing ships. With his heart pounding, Bryce walked over to the table. "Mr. Cross?" Harold looked up, his gray eyes calm and without a trace of malice. "Son." "Sir, I wanted to apologize," Bryce stammered, feeling small and foolish. "What I said, how I acted, there's no excuse. I was arrogant, and I was wrong." Harold took a slow sip of his coffee. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. Bryce sat. "Don't apologize for being smart, son," Harold said gently. "You are smart. You just haven't learned to listen yet. The machines will talk to you if you let them. They'll tell you everything you need to know. Your job isn't to force them to obey, it's to understand what they're trying to say." He smiled, a small, kind expression. "It takes a while to learn the language. If you enjoyed this story of quiet valor and timeless wisdom, please like and share this video. Subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that honor the unassuming heroes who walk among us.